Okay, well, let's get the show on the road. I'm Phil Klissa with the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. I'm an older white woman with my hair pulled back and I have glasses. There on the screen, you will see some Zoom setting information about if you are in need of an ASL interpreter for sign language. You can look for ASL interpreter Jill KK or ASL interpreter Derek, and you can go to the three little dots at the corner of their screen and pin them so that you have easy access to them. If you are in need of Spanish translation, you can click the little globe on the bottom of the toolbar and select Spanish language translation from the menu. We also have available closed captioning, and there is a little CC icon on the bottom of your toolbar, Zoom toolbar screen, and you can select show subtitles and then view full transcripts. And you should be able to see the closed captioning. Julio, do you want to share this information as well?
Yep. As Phil said, there is a Spanish interpretation available for this meeting. So please, even if you don't speak Spanish, everybody needs to pick a language channel. So please, everybody on the call, if you can choose an English or the Spanish channel. To do that, you need to click on the interpretation globe at the bottom of your screen if you are in a computer, and then select the language channel. Please do not stay in off. If you are in a mobile device, just click on the screen, touch the screen, and then you will see the three dots, and then you can find language interpretation, and then you can choose either Spanish or English. I'm going to repeat this in Spanish. Hola, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Hay español.
Hello to everybody. Thank you for being here. There is interpretation in Spanish available, and you can have access going at the bottom of your screen and get the icon of the world, and then you are going to click there and choose a language. Please choose a language. Then if you are in a smartphone, you're going to go for the three dots, click on the three dots, and you're going to be seeing the availability of language interpretation in English. And then you can choose your language of preference. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you, Julio. And just a few more notes. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. And there'll be some time after Tammy's presentation and after Beth's presentation at the end for Q&A. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If we don't get to your questions, we do plan on putting out a question and answer summary, and we will try to answer them after the training. So in addition to that, if you are looking for continuing education credits, there'll be a survey link at the end of the presentations for you to click and then follow those instructions to fill out a short survey in order to get your CEUs, which will be coming to you via email. So make sure that your email is correct, and it'll take about a month for you to get those. And lastly, but most importantly, we also have a feedback survey that we would like you to fill out at the end of this training, and that will just help us with further training, as they come available. So now I would like to turn it over to Tammy Jackson. I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right, good afternoon, friends. I am navigating to my presentation because I, of course, have way too many things open on my screen at the same time, so bear with me. Welcome this afternoon to a training about supported decision-making agreements in Wisconsin. My name is Tammy Jackson. I am the Public Policy and Legislative Liaison for the Wisconsin Board for people with developmental disabilities. And I'm a mid-career public policy professional with shoulder-length hair and glasses. Along with other disability advocates and older adults, I was one of the people that helped design and shepherd Wisconsin's supported decision-making legislation into law, which became an option for people in April of 2018. Today, we have a pretty diverse audience with us. We have a number of professionals, including teachers, legal professionals, folks that work in the disability field, and potentially some medical friends. We also have family members in the audience and people with disabilities and others who may be interested in using supported decision-making agreements. So you will hear me refer to professionals, families, and people with disabilities throughout the presentation to distinguish some of the differences in perspectives that these three kind of big groups may have. I will also be describing slide content for attendees with visual impairments. So today we are going to talk about the specifics of Wisconsin supported decision-making law. But we're also going to be setting the context by which people are thinking about and making decisions about what kind of supports they need to make decisions. There are lots of conversations about, do I need a power of attorney? Do I need a guardianship? Or perhaps no conversations that happen with the various options that people have to either get assistance or have another person make decisions on their behalf. My organization is focused on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but certainly supported decision-making agreements are for lots of different people with disabilities and older adults. So I'm going to be trying to help people understand, how these different populations might approach that. We're going to talk about the differences between some of the options people have for help with decision making, and also a lot of the fears and myths and misperceptions that people have and bring to the table with them when they're thinking about what to do. So the first thing that I always like to start off with is that in Wisconsin, there is a magical age in which legally you are responsible for the decisions that you make. At 18, Wisconsin law says, okay, you've reached 18 and we presume that you can make your own decisions now. Nothing magical about the age of 18. It's a number. Some of us were great at making decisions before 18. Some of us are in our 40s and still learning, and that's okay. Age 18, you become responsible for your own decision-making unless a court has taken those civil rights away from you, okay? So the law presumes that you are competent unless the court says that you're not. I will say that most people who are over 18 look back at their 18-year-old selves and can think of at least one or two times when they made a decision that they wouldn't make now. And that's because decision-making is a learning skill, and people learn from mistakes as well as successes. So when people make a decision that perhaps families or other people in their lives don't agree with, it's not necessarily a sign that they shouldn't be making their own decisions. It's just that they didn't make the same one that somebody who has more practice and experience with decision making would have made for themselves. There's sometimes a notion and a little bit of a double standard. Many people that is applied to people with disabilities, and it's this idea that we want somebody to make 100% good decisions to be allowed to make any decision. And that just isn't reality for any of us. So 18 is when you become legally responsible for the decisions that you make. But 18 is not a magic number that says all of your decisions have to be good or the one somebody else would choose. They're simply your decisions, and you end up living with the consequences of it. Lots of ways people practice decision making before age 18. You know, sometimes things are simple. People figure out what their preferences are, from everything what to wear, what to eat, to what topics they like in school. They choose interests, who they like being around, who they don't like being around. How do they want to spend their free time? Reading a book, video games, outside, gardening, all reasonable choices. And they get practice with higher stakes decisions. Do you want to go? Do you not? You know, those types of things are all decisions that people are practicing before they get to this magical age of 18. But a lot of people with disabilities don't get necessarily the same exposure or practice to those common things as able-bodied people do. And that is, that's not necessarily their fault. It's that we have a cultural bias that sometimes says, well, people with disabilities don't need that practice. And they do, because they're like the rest of us, right? So when you talk with people with disabilities, I have a graph up on the screen now about what, you know, the law presumes that everybody is competent unless the court's decided otherwise. But culturally, the opposite is presumed for people with disabilities. Oftentimes, especially for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the presence of a disability actually is in direct conflict with what the law presumes. If you talk with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they will often point to experiences where somebody learned they had a disability, or perhaps it was visible, and made the assumption that they were not the decider about things in their own life. So in that sense, that cultural bias, we call it ableism, actually presumes that the person with a disability is not competent to make their own decision, which is in direct conflict with what the law says. And that has an impact, not only on people with disabilities, but on families and professionals who work with people with disabilities and families, members of people with disabilities. And I want to pause and just say that, you know, when that bias kicks in and you talk with people with disabilities and you ask, what does it feel like when somebody presumes that you are not in control of your own life, or that you aren't able to make your own decisions, even if the decision is kind of not a big one, or when somebody turns to whomever you're with, whether it's a friend or somebody who's actually related to you, and starts talking to them about you while you're standing there, and assumes that they are the person making the decision for you, what does that make you feel? And a lot of the things that are listed up here are pretty damaging when you think about, you know, what does it mean to be taught that, you know, through everyday kind of experiences, that folks don't think that you are the decider. We have a term for it in disability world called learned helplessness, where the more somebody else makes decisions for you, the less likely you are to attempt to make decisions on your own. And when you think about practically, you know, what the person is learning. They're learning things like somebody else makes decisions. My preferences don't matter. I have to comply. I can't say no. I don't have control over my own life. If I'm not perfect, I can't do it at all. There are consequences if I don't comply with what someone else wants. This is all language and thought that really leads to, frankly, abuse and neglect and lack of safety, which are all things that no one wants for anyone, including people with abilities. The other part of this chart is, well, what does that look like? You know, we don't want the results of people with disabilities feeling like they don't have control over their lives, but how are we as families or professionals kind of teaching them that lesson unconsciously? And, you know, there's some things, if you think about your interactions with various, you know, entities, maybe some of these things are familiar to you. If you're a family member, has somebody in a meeting deferred to you when making a decision about your loved one? Have you been in meetings where you and the person you're meeting with have made all of the decisions while the person with a disability was there, and did they not have any input? Are there things that as a family member you've had to do that meet the needs of whatever service system you're interacting with that have really not a lot to do with the preferences or desires of a person with a disability? I can't see you nodding or not nodding, but I think probably for some of you, you can think of an example. Likewise, those of you who are professionals, you know, when somebody with a disability comes in without somebody with them, I've had lots of folks say they're looking for the other person to make the decisions, right? You know, are there assumptions that your organization makes that assume that a person with a disability has a guardian? Are there policies and protocols that don't include space for a power of attorney or a supporter in a drop-down menu, for example? Like, these aren't big things, but there's plenty of institutions that have only a drop-down and the only selection available is guardian. Well, there are other things that do not mean guardian that should be part of that menu. But the fact that there isn't is a sign that there's an assumption that that's the option that people have. We've also run into lots of systems that kind of see all these terms, supported decision-making, powers of attorney, and guardianship as the same, when they're very legally distinct. And that's a real challenge. So you don't have to take my word. Actually research, and we can get you citations if you want, that people who have a higher ability to make decisions about their own life, that's what self-determination is, tend to be healthier, more independent, have fewer mental health issues, and are able to recognize and resist abuse. In other words, they're safer. And it really isn't a surprise that when people can make their own decisions, people can exercise their rights, and they feel like they're treated fairly and have respect, that this leads to better life experiences. This slide is pretty busy. It's a graph, and it's detailing information from what is called the National Core Indicators, a national survey of all the states, mainly of folks within Medicaid long-term programs. And it assesses lots of things. One of the things that they look at is what's the correlation between whether or not, how people can exercise their civil rights. So this graph lists a number of different things. Can you choose your own services? Can you choose your own personal goals? Can you live in integrated environment, means, with people with disabilities and without disabilities? Do you get to choose who you live with? Do you get to choose where you work? Things that for able-bodied people, we assume are all part of our experience. For lots of people with disabilities, it's not. And I want to say, the metric here is, can people choose services? Is that present in your life or not present? And present means kind of at all. There are degrees of presence, right? If I have two choices, neither one of which I like, I might choose to answer that question and say, well, I do have a choice. And it doesn't go beyond that. Lots of people with disabilities, have experienced a lifetime of low expectations. So I want to throw that caveat in there, that when we're looking at this data and seeing things like, no, 60% of people with disabilities say, I don't get a choice on where I work. That 39.5% who says, yes, I have a choice, that may not be a choice of I can choose anywhere, right? And I think that this is instructive to us because, when you look at how many pretty major categories in folks' lives, they really don't feel like they have any choice or control in. It's a very clear sign that those folks are really not having the same experience that we expect for people who are able-bodied. I'm going to switch a little bit here, and this slide is focused on kind of the wider context that many families, especially families with kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities, are navigating when their child is transition age is from 18 to 21 into adulthood. And we could replace the column that says challenges for families with different things. And, it would fit for folks who are navigating the crisis that comes with somebody's acquired a disability because of an accident at an older age, or you have an older adult who all of a sudden has some health or declining condition, and there's a crisis. Lots of times the discussion of, does somebody need help with decisions and what kind of help should that be, is made in the larger context of crisis. And it is not necessarily done with future planning in mind. So for families with kids with disabilities, keep in mind their daily lives, they are probably already managing caregiving challenges. There are some folks that have significant medical or personal care needs as part of their disability. And as we know, there is a shortage of paid caregivers. So many family members are taking on some of those responsibilities. We have a transportation system that doesn't cater to people who can't drive. So lots of times families are doing the process of how to get from here to there. They have other children who also have their other needs. That's the kind of normal daily crisis. And then on top of that, you add, oh, your child is turning 18. Here, fill out the Medicaid paperwork. Do the functional screen to get into a long-term care program. Navigate Social Security. Interact with the schools. Need to navigate with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, other programs, other things. And it's a lot of work. I have to just say that you know, one of the things that we hear from family caregivers the most is it is an extraordinary and mental and emotional and toll to have to think through all of these things. And it's really hard to get through all the paperwork correctly. And then probably you're going to make a mistake, and then you've got to navigate the appeal or other processes. It is a significant amount of mental work to do those things. And at the same time, we're asking them questions like, well, have you thought about whether your person needs any decision-making support, or have you considered guardianship? You know, a whole nother layer of stuff. And a lot of times families, you know, have concerns, as we all do. You know, you've had a relationship with a child for 17 and a half years, and you've watched them grow, and you're a parent. And I don't think there's a single parent who thinks that their 18-year-old is really ready to take on the world or to make great decisions all the time. And I think a lot of families also have an additional layer of fear because they have engaged with the system all the way through, that maybe hasn't been so good at listening to their child with a disability. You know, will they listen to them? You know, how will they, can they manage to do the things that like help them keep their health care, etc. Now, there's some really legitimate worries that people have that are sometimes not related to the person, but the difficulty that the systems that they have had to engage with have placed on them. Oops, there we go. So this is a slide that we use typically in all of our presentations, and it is meant to be kind of a continuum, you know, a sliding scale of decision-making options that are available in Wisconsin. You'll see on the bottom of this graphic that there's an arrow with two ends on it. And on one side, near the green column that says release forms, is the term less limiting. And then we go to supported decision-making agreements, rep payee, power of attorney, and limited and full guardianship. And by the time you get to limited and full guardianship, the scale says more limiting. What we mean by limiting is limiting your actual rights to make your own decisions. I'm going to start with the less limiting options. Lots of times in the green column, you'll see release forms. Release forms are commonly used. Able-bodied people use them. Lots of different kinds of organization uses them. And it's really an acknowledgement, permission that you, the person, give for some other people to access information about you, records. And a lot of times, you might have to sign a release form once, or maybe every time you're authorizing somebody to see your records. But you don't give up any of your rights to make your own decisions when you do that. You do let somebody else see your information, and they may be able to help you understand that information or help you engage with somebody else about that information. And that's all it is permission for somebody else. Nobody loses any rights. Moving to the second column, the yellow column, which is supported decision-making agreements, I have in parentheses Wisconsin because there are now 12 states and the District of Columbia that have laws on the books that allow the use of supported decision-making agreements. Not every state. And of course, every state's laws, not only on supported decision-making agreements, but how powers of attorney and guardianship laws work in their own state too. So in Wisconsin, our supported decision-making agreement law says, hey, You're the person, you are always making your own decisions. You can use a supported decision-making agreement without losing any of your civil legal rights to make your own decisions. You are choosing what areas of decision-making you would like help with and who, a supporter, you would like to help and how you want them to help you. And we'll go into kind of the nuts and bolts of supported decision-making a little bit later. So that agreement really is the terms of what do I want help with, who do I want to help me, and how do I want them to help me. You don't lose your rights. You're always the decider. And the supporter doesn't make decisions for you, because the roles of the supporter are pretty clearly defined. Okay, moving to the middle column, lots of people with disabilities may be involved with Social Security. And Social Security has an option where you may designate a representative payee. And that person is the person who receives your benefit checks and manages how those benefit checks are spent. So in some ways, well, they do, a representative payee does control the use of those those dollars that come from benefit checks. And there are reasons that people do that, but it is a loss. If you're the person, it is a loss of direct control over those finances. So it's not quite that you lose your rights, but you do lose your access and ability to fully control how those funds are spent. And for most people without disabilities, that is something that we don't expect will happen. A little farther along the continuum is a power of attorney. And there are basically two kinds of powers of attorney for medical and financial decision-making. So medical and financial decision-making does not encompass the entire world of decisions that somebody might make. And powers of attorney are formal legal arrangements that do permit another person, the power of attorney, to act on the person's behalf in certain circumstances, sometimes all the time. Powers of attorney can be written in a lot of different ways. And I think that's something that, that professionals, other than lawyers, sometimes don't necessarily understand is that, a power of attorney can be written so that it is only activated or triggered in certain circumstances. So, for example, if I got into a car accident and I was in a coma and unable to make my own medical decisions, my power of attorney for medical care would be activated, and by a designated to be my power of attorney would be making medical decisions for me until I regained my ability to do so. And when I regain my ability to do so, then the power of attorney is no longer, it's not triggered anymore. And that power of attorney is making decisions. So that's an example of, a circumstance in which that kind of legal arrangement might be in effect for some period of time and then no longer be in effect. There are also more durable powers of attorney where perhaps the power of attorney has equal decision-making ability all the time. So there's a pretty wide range and flexibility of how you set up your power of attorney to work. And lots of times professionally, people aren't reading necessarily the fine print when it comes to are we executing this correctly? On the farthest side, the purple column is limited or full guardianship. And this is actually where people's civil rights are removed. In other words, you are petitioning a court to take some or all of an individual's decision-making authority from them, and you're transferring that authority to another person appointed by the court, the guardian. The difference between limited and full guardianship is really by degree. You know, it's that, are you taking some rights away from somebody and leaving them with the ability to make some decisions about their own lives themselves, whereas other decisions are made by the guardian? Or are you taking pretty much all of somebody's decision-making authority away at the same time? Guardianship is a significant limitation on people's ability to make their own decisions and their civil rights. And on this continuum, oftentimes, especially for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but not exclusively so, the decision with the longest lasting impact, that has the most consequences, that is the most severe in terms of taking away somebody's rights, is the option that is discussed first, as opposed to all of these other things that are options that do not infringe upon somebody's rights. And it goes back to, you know, what do we think culturally people with disabilities are able to do in terms of making decisions about their own lives. The fact that we start the conversation with the most significant intervention, as opposed to trying some of these other things, I think tells us a lot about, you know, what we think of as normal and routine. And it has a big impact, not only for the individual who ends up being under guardianship, but for the system as a whole, and also families. We have done variation, BPDD, that is, has done a lot of training, both families and professionals, since the supported decision-making agreement law passed in 2018. And I have a table up here that outlines some of the common things that we have heard from families and that we've heard from professionals about guardianship. These are myths. None of the statements that I'm about to say are true, but people have heard them and they believe them. And it is and many times, because they've heard and believed these myths, they pursue guardianship without knowing that there are other options, or they assume guardianship without understanding if it really is in place. So a really common thing that families hear is, oh, your child is turning 18. If you want to continue to attend your school's IEP meetings, you need to be the guardian. That is absolutely untrue. In fact, most parents, first time they hear about guardianship, it's actually from a teacher. All of a student with a disability has to say if they turn 18 is, I'd like my mom to continue to come to IEP meetings. That's all they need. But the way it's phrased and the way parents hear it, they believe they have to go to court to get a guardianship in order to attend the meeting. We've also heard, you know, people say, well, if I'm the guardian, then if they get into trouble with the law, they can't be punished. Not true. Lots of people are led to believe that guardianship is kind of just an administrative thing that you do. We make it easy in this state. You could go and fill the form out. You don't need to necessarily consult a lawyer. And a lot of times people just fill out the form, check all the boxes without even knowing what rights they're taking away. It isn't an administrative process. It's a court process that is pretty much permanently removing somebody's civil rights, and it isn't easy to change later. yes, there is a procedure in statute to change a guardianship or even get it rescinded. But the reality is that in practice, it almost never happens. And lots of times people are, you know, not in a financial position to be able to keep going back to court. Lots of times people believe that becoming the guardian is a way to continue a parental role and that they can make all decisions. Well, you're always going to be a parent, whether or not you're the guardian. And the law is pretty clear that a guardian is not supposed to be making all decisions. We'll get to that a little bit later. And a guardian has actually some legal responsibilities that lots of parents don't realize before they take on that responsibility. There's like administrative and paperwork and other types of responsibilities because you are a person that the court is monitoring to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do under the law. Also, sometimes we hear about folks believing that the court will do what they ask. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Once you're engaged with the court and saying to the court, I think this person is legally incompetent to make their own decisions and I should be the guardian, the court's responsibility is to evaluate whether or not they are competent. And they may look at a request for a limited guardianship and they may decide, no, we're going to do a full guardianship. And that's their decision. So you actually aren't telling the court what they're going to do. The court, you're putting the court in a position of deciding what will be done. Lots of professionals, if somebody says that they're a guardian, they believe it. There isn't necessarily a detailed reading of the order of guardianship, which details what powers a guardian has and doesn't have. They also believe maybe a guardian makes all the decisions, or maybe I should ask even when I'm not sure, or maybe the criteria for somebody, a person with a disability, they have to do things perfectly, otherwise they need a guardian. Sometimes professionals believe that all guardians are acting in the best interest of their wards. A lot of times that's true, but sometimes it isn't. And, you know, I've been talking for a while now about families and professionals, but there's somebody that's missing from this conversation. And it's important that, you know, for all of the language I've been using, we haven't really been talking about the person with a disability or the older adult or the person with a mental health condition who may be subject to a guardianship. They are often not involved at all with these kinds of conversations about whether they should be allowed to be able to make decisions on their own lives. It is folks around them that are having these conversations. And I have to say, if you went to the average 18-year-old and said, you know, do you want me to, you know, I don't think you're ready to make all decisions. So how about if we go to court and take all of your civil rights away to make decisions and give control to your parents about your life choices ever? If you ask that to most 18-year-olds, they would say no. I would have said no. I would have said that does not sound like something that I would like to do. I would bet that most people with disabilities would have the same answer, but nobody asked people with disabilities that question. And nobody stops the process to say that that isn't necessarily where we should be starting, right? And I think that's a real sign again of guardianship has been perceived as an administrative thing without consequence, and it really isn't. And it really isn't what we expect from somebody who doesn't have a disability. So for folks who might be subject to guardianship, it's significant that they aren't consulted. They may not be aware that anybody is petitioning a court to even take their rights away. They don't know what rights they retain or what rights have been removed or what rights they always have, even if they're under guardianship in the statutes. They don't know that they can petition to have a guardianship changed or reversed, and there's no one to help them do it if that's what they want. They may not be aware that the court system is not appointing, opposing counsel for them to defend their rights. There's a guardian ad litem whose interest is the best interest of the ward, but that is not the same as an argument against the petitioner that no, I do not need this. And when you think about how powerless that can make somebody, the court office is responsible for appointing whomever will become the next guardian, which is rarely something families are thinking about at age 17 and a half. And, I almost always have parents on these presentations who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and asking the question, oh, do you mean the court appoints the next person? And maybe the person they thought they wanted to give the guardianship to has already passed. Or maybe they're not in the state anymore. Or maybe there was never a backup plan. That person may end up with somebody as their guardian who they do not know. And that kind of ties into what are the consequences for families. Guardianship is not thought of, it is not discussed as a long-term family future planning thing. And it's not really revisited. Lots of people who are petitioning for guardianship really don't know what those checkboxes on the forms are meaning. They don't necessarily know limited guardianship is an option. And even if they want to change it later, it may be financially prohibitive to do so. So families may be successful in getting a guardianship and then discover as life happens and things change over time that maybe it isn't the best fit, or maybe there isn't somebody to take over, and you have this thing that you can't necessarily move on from. There's another slide here that continues, some of these long-term consequences. I think continuing with families, there's sometimes a view that guardianship is protective, and it's a piece of paper. It doesn't have a protective veneer around the person. Lots of families really don't understand what a guardian is legally supposed to do, and sometimes they act in ways that are contradictory to Wisconsin law, not because they want to, because they don't know. And we make it easy. When professionals keep deferring to a guardian all the time about every decision, it reinforces that the guardian should be doing that. And it reinforces to the person under guardianship that they really aren't supposed to be in charge of their own lives. And a lot of families aren't necessarily aware that, if you're a guardian, you might end up being the decider on some pretty heavy stuff. Like, you're the guardian, you're going to be the one who's going to be expected to decide, sometimes on medical treatment, end of life care. What do you do when you've got to figure out where somebody needs to live? you're the responder. And I think that's a role that is really hard and that never gets talked about on the front end of this process. And when you talk with people with disabilities, they will also talk about, you know, kind of a mission creep where the guardian, you know, there are more and more things that the guardian is managing, more and more daily decision making that is being decided by the guardian. So, you know, once you kind of lose your rights, it is easy to keep seeing them and your decision-making ability erode away. So, you know, just in closing, guardianship isn't just an administrative process. It's got some pretty heavy consequences. You know, you're legally being declared incompetent. And we really shouldn't be talking about guardianship as the first option. A lot of times it's the only option presented or considered. And just for fun, you know, even when you are a guardian, there are expectations that you are putting the least possible restriction on individual rights, that you are promoting the greatest possible integration, and that you're making efforts to identify and honor the individual's preferences. So the law is pretty clear about the spirit of what a guardian should be doing. Many people who are under guardianship do not describe that this is what actually feels like it's happening in their lives. Okay, I am now going to transition to talking about supported decision-making law, which was one of those options that we saw on the continuum. Phil, you turned your camera on. Are you waiting to interrupt me with, okay, Phil's saying no. Okay, so supported decision-making is a very different approach. Unlike guardianship, the person retains all of their rights. And you'll hear me say this over and over again. It is based on the presumption that people are competent to make their own decisions, but that sometimes they need help making those decisions. And help doesn't mean somebody deciding for them. Help means the kind of support that most able-bodied people do when they consult their friends about major decisions in their lives. I use sometimes an example of, you know, if I need to buy a car, there are people in my life that know things about cars. And I probably call them up and say, hey, you know, here's what I'm thinking about, get some advice, hang up the phone, maybe I call 2 or 3 people, then I make up my own decision based on that information. That's kind of the concept of how supported decision-making works in general, all of us. And for people with disabilities and older adults, there is this new option based on that, on the way people actually live their lives, that formalizes that agreement. In Wisconsin, not everybody can use a supported decision-making agreement, but lots of people can. The actual state statute says that people with functional impairments can use a supported decision-making agreement. Importantly, you, the person who's deciding whether or not you want to use a supported decision-making agreement, decide whether you meet this criteria. There is no medical examination or documentation needed for you to say, I have enough functional impairment that I feel like I'm qualified to use supported decision-making. And functional impairments include the following categories of people automatically. People of any age with degenerative diseases, people of any age with conditions that interfere with their ability to provide self-care, people with physical disabilities or conditions that substantially limit one or more of major life activities, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and people with mental health conditions. So, pretty expansive. Folks with sensory disabilities could use this, mental health disabilities, people with MS or, Alzheimer's or other things, and you don't have to be a certain age to use it. You just have to need more help than somebody who is doesn't meet one of these categories. Importantly, supported decision-making agreements can be used for anything you want help. So unlike powers of attorney that are set up primarily for health or financial decision-making, supported decision-making agreements can help you figure out what phone plan is right, help you figure out your internet connection, help you choose who you want to prepare your taxes. Whatever your need is, you can tailor your agreement to identify a supporter who can do certain roles that will help you figure out what you want to do. They also can be easily updated. So you don't need to file a petition with a court or go to an attorney necessarily to set them up. There's an online form and you can fill it out. Supported decision-making agreements, again, the person who sets up the agreement is always the decider. They're always in control of their own decisions. They can make a decision that is contrary to what their supporter thinks is a good idea. That's okay. The person is always the decider. The supporter doesn't gain any rights. If you're a supporter supporting somebody with a supported decision-making agreement, you don't have any authority to make their decisions for you. The person makes their decisions. You can't sign legal documents for them. And you can't do things that are outside of what the agreement lets you do. Well, what are those roles? The law defines or supporter. So if you're asked to be a supporter, you may help somebody access, obtain information, collect information that is relevant to the decision area the person has chosen. So in other words, like if you sign a release form to let somebody see an information and you want your supporter to see that information, they have to sign a release form. But that person has access to information that may help you make a decision. They can help you understand what that information is. The third thing they can do is help somebody understand their options. You don't have to make somebody's decisions for them to help them understand, well, okay, here's the information we have, and it looks like there's a couple different things you can do, and there's some pros and there's some cons to each of those decision areas. That's a valuable role that, a lot of us who have good friends want us to do. And the fourth thing, which, to be honest, I did not appreciate as being as significant as it was when we passed the law, is to assist communicating that person's decisions to others. And that has been actually a huge benefit for people. I'm thinking of some of our friends with cerebral palsy who have speech impediments or perhaps other conditions or nonverbal. Makes it hard for them to speak or communicate in a traditional form, but they're very clear about what they want. And a lot of times that's all they want for the supporter. They want that supporter there to help be essentially a translator for them. And it's a hugely valuable role a supporter can play. Being a supporter doesn't mean that you just get to access anybody's personal information. The law does have some constraints here. You only get to get the information that's relevant to the decision at hand. You might have to sign a release form, and that's fine. And no, you can't post and disclose stuff on Facebook that you've gotten. There's an expectation that you're using the information that's relevant to help the person within the context of the agreement, and that you're not using it in any other way that isn't that. People can have multiple supported decision-making agreements. Some of us have bigger networks than others. I certainly wouldn't ask probably the same person for tax advice as I do with how do I, sign up for Medicare or something else. I'm not Medicare age, but I get a lot of spam calls. And it's perfectly legitimate to have multiple supporters and multiple supported decision-making agreements that may deal with this different aspects of your life. When you think about how people really live their lives, most of us have a network of people that have expertise in different things. It's pretty rare that you find one individual who can help you with everything. Ironically, if you're the guardian, you're the person who's expected to help with everything. So it's kind of a little bit backwards how people really live their lives versus sometimes what our system may have as a solution. Just like you're in charge, if you're the person setting up your agreement, of what the terms of that agreement are, what you want help with, and who you want to help with it, you're also in charge of, when that agreement ends. The other great thing about supported decision-making agreements is that flexibility to evolve and change, which you don't necessarily get with guardianships, right? Because you have to keep going back to court and negotiating and relitigating competency level. With supported decision-making agreements, somebody says, you know what, I've got practice with this area of decision-making, or my big thing I had to do was move, and I've moved. You can say, okay, we're done with that. We don't need that agreement anymore. Or maybe you decide that, you did pretty well at a decision and you need less help. Okay. Or maybe you said, you know what, I'm really not that good at this and I'd like more help. A supported decision-making agreement can easily be revised, revisited, recheck in with your supporters, see if they're willing to do the same role or need to do a different role. And you can decide a specific date when the agreement ends. The supporter can say, hey, I can't do the terms of the agreement as you've outlined them anymore. So let's work to find another person who can. That's important. And once you're the guardian, you're the guardian until the court appoints a different one. And that's a real challenge because, life keeps coming at folks fast. Sometimes you have other crises or other things happening in your lives that limit your capacity to serve in the same role as you have been, like small children or older adult aging parents who need their own care, or all sorts of other things that families routinely deal with. There are some provisions in the law where agreements are automatically revoked. So if you're, accused of neglect or abuse of the person, or have been found criminally liable, or there's a restraining order against you, the agreement is automatically revoked. There are also some other provisions within the law that are helpful for professionals. Liability protections, which essentially means if you get handed a supported decision-making agreement, you can rely on that as a legal expression of the person's wishes. There's also protections against fraud, abuse, and neglect. Again, ways that these agreements are automatically terminated if it really looks like a supporter is abusing or not, or going beyond the role that they've been signed. So briefly, what's included in the supported decision-making agreement? The actual statute includes all the elements that are on the supported decision-making. So some of these will be pretty familiar to you. There are parts of lots of forms, like your name and your contact information, identifying who the supporter is, the roles, those 4 roles: accessing information, understanding information, comparing your choices and options, and helping communicate your decisions. Those are the 4 roles that you want the supporter to have. And any effective date of the agreement. And then to make it official, you need the signature of the supporter and either 2 witnesses or a notary public. There are also some types of decisions that are part of the standard form. You know, some of them are, you know, food, clothing, shelter, physical health, financial affairs, mental health, public benefits, seeking state agency services. But the really important one is the one that's highlighted in yellow down here. This is what makes supported decision-making agreements so flexible. Other decisions, which opens up the world to any other decisions that you might think you want help with. So you are certainly able to check off, yes, I want help with, you know, the items that are always part of the form, but it's really this other clause that helps you make this document your own. And the law assumes that if you don't affirmatively check, yes, I want help with this, that the supporter does not have permission to help with that decision. So the fact that the form isn't, you know, filled out, you know, unless you check yes, you are not giving permission for the supporter to have a vote. So for the professionals on the call, not knowing what all of you do, it is important that you take a look at your, you know, guidance documents, your internal policies, your technology systems, forms, the things that people interact with as customers every day, and make sure that if you've got processes that have people identify a guardian and or a power of attorney, that you're also including supported decision-making, because this is an option in the state, and it means something very different than a power of attorney or a guardian. It's also important, just like you would include a letter of guardianship so that you know what the parameters are for somebody who says that they're a guardian, and a power of attorney, that you include supported decision-making agreements in your client's files or records. And, you know, also think about what are the ways that you you welcome people in to meetings or other processes. You know, how do you make sure that you're recognizing that supporters may have a distinct role to play in the normal course of your business? I will pause and say that folks who, you know, are using any type of documentation, whether it's a guardianship or a power of attorney or a decision-making agreement, it really is a good idea for you to maintain a list of where you've left those documents. And if there is a change to those documents, to go through your list and make sure that all the entities you deal with have the most up-to-date copy of your documents. Not this, you know, everybody should be doing that no matter what you're using, so that when you are engaging with professionals, they understand what the most current expression of your wishes is. Also, more for professionals, you know, this is a great opportunity to think about how are you communicating with people with disabilities and older adults and their families. Some of these are very, you know, subtle shifts in how you do business that really make a big difference. Talk to the person, not the supporter. Even when there is a guardian, it's important that the person understands that you are asking them things, because the guardian's role is supposed to be to support them in their wishes and preferences. Slow yourself down. Are you giving enough space in what you're saying to build in time for questions? Build in time for decisions? Are you using plain language? lots of times there are forms and legal language and things that come from state agencies that are very difficult for people to understand. Even people who are, you know, college educated folks may read a letter 3 times and not quite get what the message is. You know, lots of people that you are interacting with, some of them may not read. You know, some of them may read at a level that is less than what your documents are written. Make sure that you are talking to folks using the plainest language possible to increase understanding. If somebody has a supporter with them, give them time to interact with each other. The supporter can actually help you do your work, because sometimes the supporter will hear what you say and they'll go, okay, I need to translate what this person is saying into a way, in a way that Bob knows how to understand, right? Give any important information in writing and make sure it's plain language. And most importantly, respect the person's decision, no matter what it is or whether you agree with it, because it is their decision. They are the decider. Very quickly, you know, why would we want to pass a law to do something that seems pretty simple and seems like it reflects how most people live their lives? Well, there are lots of people who have people in their lives that can help them, but there wasn't a way for them to legally be recognized as you know, having an official role. My friend Janet would say, you know, or in her world, she works with a lot of older adults, you know, there were lots of single older women. Sometimes their husbands had passed before them, or they'd never gotten married. Sometimes they had children, but they were in other states. Their closest relationships, people that they knew best, who saw them on a daily basis, weren't necessarily family. They might have been friends. And of course, there's a lot of people who don't have family at all. So this is a way that, you know, we can recognize some of these important relationships that aren't necessarily family and give them a role of that they can fulfill to help. Supported decision-making agreements. Again, I said that flexibility piece. It can you know, you can evolve a supported decision-making agreement to do less or do more. That's really important for people who are experiencing some changes in a condition. A lot of people need a little help for a long time. It doesn't help somebody who's in their 60s with Alzheimer's to get a guardianship right away and then really only need it when they're 95, you know? So this is a way that you don't need to do the most significant thing legally first. You can do a supported decision-making agreement and even evolve the agreement to have a greater and greater role before you necessarily have to try other options. Agreements can be used for lots of decisions that a powers of attorney don't cover. It's a way to keep engaged and to keep yourself hearing the same things if you are a family member or a parent without necessarily making decisions for somebody. For lots of people, it's especially important that they have somebody who knows their communication style, and it helps clearly communicate their wishes, their feelings, their thoughts, their condition to professionals so that they understand them. The same is true on the other end, that you know, medical professionals too, sometimes they need a translator to make sure the patient understands what is happening, especially since sometimes, you know, the person who's receiving the news may not feel well, or has, maybe on medications, or is just in general distress, like having a person there who can communicate in a way that makes sense to them is really, really helpful. This is a link to the official supported decision-making form. It is housed on the Department of Health Services website, and you can go to this link and download an agreement and fill it out if you need to. We also have, as part of our organization, developed a toolkit for families and for people with disabilities to help folks kind of work through, is this an option that's right for you? How do you revisit a supported decision-making agreement? What do you want people who receive this agreement to know? So it's pretty comprehensive, available for download for free at any time. And for folks who really want to get in depth, of course, I have put a link in there to the state statutes. Supported decision-making agreements are covered under Chapter 52. So if you really want to read the close legal language, that is where it is. And I have a hard stop, I've been told, at 2:30. So I'm 9 minutes ahead of schedule. And we have, Phil, you are helping manage questions.
Yes, we've had some good discussion in the chat. I'm going to try to frame some of these in questions. We also have Mitch Hagopian available. He's an attorney with Disability Rights Wisconsin. So if there's any legal questions, Mitch, you can chime in and help us out here. The first question I see is from Stephen, and he asks, is it possible to have a supported decision-making agreement and a representative payee?
Yes, that's a great question. That continuum slide that I showed, and you will get this presentation in its entirety. Supported decision-making can be used in combination with a rep payee, with a power of attorney, with release forms, and even if you have a limited guardianship, you can use a supported decision-making agreement for those decision areas where the person's retained their rights to make their own decisions. So it really can be used in combination with some of these other options. It's not you either use this or you use something else.
Okay, the next question, Beth Ann asked, what if a guardian passes away? And then there was some discussion about that in terms of a standby or a successor guardianship or guardian. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and Mitch, you can fill in what I miss. You can designate a successor guardian, and most of the time the court will take that very seriously because no one lives forever. So if you are the guardian and you have identified a successor guardian, and that successor guardian is alive and willing to assume that role, the court will often appoint that successor guardian as the next person. However, if sometimes a successor guardian doesn't want the role or has passed on as well, then the court has to appoint another guardian. They always have to appoint somebody else. And it may be that they have to appoint a volunteer or
oh, I think somebody has unmuted themselves. If everyone could just check to see that they're muted. Okay. All right. Then there was a comment. Sorry, I have to scroll back up here. Okay, is the process of putting supported decision-making in place the same as guardianship?
No. Guardianship is a court process. You have to petition the court, and there are things that you must do as part of that petition, including getting a medical exam to declare incompetency. The court is deciding whether or not somebody is legally competent to make their own decision. And Mitch, maybe you have some other thoughts on that. Supported decision-making agreements, you download the form on the Department of Health Services, well, not you, the person who wants to do the agreement downloads the form off of the Department of Health Services website and fills it out to set up the terms of that supported decision-making agreement.
Right, and I would add too that they're not at all the same thing. And one of the main reasons, the main difference is in guardianship, the decision maker has decision-making authority. In supported decision-making, the supporter has no authority to actually make the decision whatsoever. So just, you're not a guardian if you're a supporter. Very, very, very different legal relationships.
Tammy, there was a follow-up question regarding standby and successor, and could you please clarify standby guardian versus successor guardian?
Hey, Mitch, would you like to handle that one as well?
Sure. I think a standby guardian is one who's appointed to temporarily take the place of someone while they are unable to fulfill their duties to the ward. And so like if you know you're going to be out of the country for a couple of months, you might have a standby guardian who would be in your place to make sure nothing bad happens to the ward while you're gone. And then when you come back, you resume your duties. A successor guardian is just what it sounds like. It's the one who comes next. So Tammy's right that a lot of people, if you're really well prepared, if you're the parent of a person with a disability and you need guardianships necessary, and you happen to be a whole lot older than your ward because you're their parent, you probably want to think about having a successor guardian in mind, and you can actually have that person designated and appointed before the death occurs or whatever reason you choose to cease being a guardian, so that there is a seamless transition. There's not even a few days in between when the first guardian no longer serves and the next one is appointed.
Okay, why don't we take one more question before Beth and Jenny and Jordan get on? And that is, can an agreement be put in place if an individual needing support is unable to sign a legal document or even indicate they'd want one? That's from Shannon.
Well, they're
able to indicate you want one somehow. You can't do it for somebody else. It doesn't work. I mean, you can be the person who, physically, fills it out and all that, but there has to be some, sufficient cognitive ability and ability to express wishes such that it is clear that that is what the person wants, that that's the supporter they want, and that's who they want them, the areas that they want them to support in. If you can't do that,
and if the question is about like, can somebody may not be able to physically sign, I think I heard kind of maybe two different questions, Mitch.
Yeah, no, the physical signing, I mean, there's all sorts of ways to execute a document for people who don't have the physical ability to sign. But I heard the second part, and witnesses and all sorts of ways to do that. And especially with a supported decision-making agreement, because you're not actually transferring any of your decision-making authority to anyone. So the whole requirements about witnessing and all that are pretty low already. Whatever it takes to accommodate the person's disability to indicate that they're the ones who are, assenting to this or the ones who are making it, that'll work. But there does have to be some capacity and ability to voluntarily, express that desire.
Okay. Well, we will answer more questions at the end of the next part of our presentation. And also a reminder, we did have some discussion in the chat regarding some of the materials. You will be getting a link to the recording and all the materials, and you are welcome. We are happy to share our materials with whoever would like to have them. So please feel free to do that. If you need additional assistance, you can contact one of us and we will help you out with that. And I did put my email in the chat earlier. So including the FAQ, we will put together, if any questions are not answered, we'll compile all of them into some sort of document summary and hopefully answer some of those questions later. So thank you. Beth?
Thanks, Phil. And I'll ask Jordan and Jenny to turn on their cameras and unmute if they haven't yet. Welcome everyone this afternoon. My name is Beth Swedeen, and I'm a 50-something woman with short blonde hair. I'm wearing green glasses with a blurred background. And I am the director for the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and also the parent of a young adult who uses a variety of different decision-making tools. Her name is Kara. She is at work today. She made a decision, and her decision was not to be part of this presentation, but she also made a decision, and we talked through that she was fine with me sharing some samples and examples from her life to kind of put this supported decision-making concept into real world experience example. And with me is Jordan and Jenny to also share some real world examples from their lives. So first, Jordan, could I get you to introduce yourself?
Okay, everyone, it's nice to be here today. And my name is Jordan Anderson. I am sitting in a power wheelchair, and I am a 19-year-old male, and I have white skin.
Thank you. And Jenny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jenny, and I'm 25 years old, and I'm from the Milwaukee area, but I live somewhere else. Plus, I have long black hair, and I wear glasses. And right now, I work at Panera Bread, which is really delicious.
Jenny, would you mind just moving yourself just a little bit? Yep, there you go. Perfect.
Just a little more.
That you're good the way you are right now. And I just wanted to share that Jenny and Jordan are part of a national project that we at the board got. There is a national effort right now going on called the Center for Youth Voice, Youth Choice. It's a national grant from the Administration on Community Living. And the focus of that grant is to support states in promoting alternatives to guardianship. And part of the way that our state is supposed to be doing that is to train and support self-advocates like Jordan and like Jenny to go out and speak and share their own experiences. And so that's what they're doing today. So today we're really here to talk more about the real world experience examples, regardless of the tools that you use, how to build and maximize more decision-making into people's lives. And again, specific strategies that can offer more opportunities for people with disabilities to learn, to practice, and then to use decision-making. I think it's always interesting that the people that need the most practice, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who oftentimes need many repetitions to learn new things, but who can learn, often get the fewest actual opportunities. And so we're going to be talking this afternoon about how to build those opportunities into people's lives. So I think that before we go on though, I'd really like to have Jordan and Jenny share a little story about their own kind of path with supported decision-making. Jordan, you've got a really interesting story. Do you want to share that?
Sure, I would be honored to. So my story started out at a very own self-determination conference that the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental and with people with developmental and physical disability has this board that is holding the presentation today. It's an annual conference that they were having like a supported decision making session at their annual conference, and it was my first time attending the self determination conference, and I was going through the sessions with my a former special ed teacher, and she was I'm like, that one looks interested, and it was on guardianship, and I attended the session in 2020, and uh, a day later, believe it or not, I had my court hearing um, for what we talked about at that same session. And it was very ironic. I really enjoyed and loved the presentation. I learned a lot, and I went home the next night after school that one day, and I talked to my parents, and I told them this might happen because we um got offered to go to court, and then the um then they went to court that morning, and then they like had the normal proceeding for guardianship, and then I my parents stopped them and told them what I told them the previous night about the session on guardianship, and they uh, my parents said, "Can we get Jordan out of school and we can resume the next session, this session in about an hour?" And so they came and got me out of school, and they were telling me these are the questions that they might ask you, like who's our president, and like to see if I was incompetent enough, because they were telling me that the court was telling me that I was incompetent without even seeing me. So they were just telling me to stay calm and just say, say that it would go, everything would go okay. Just be yourself and talk to people just the way you like to talk to people. And and then we went to the court, um, the court proceeding, and then my through all of this, the attorney that we were assigned said they um didn't have the proper things, so my parents went and got another attorney, and through somebody that my dad knows, and the the attorney knew about what they were trying to guardianship and supported decision making, and um we met him at the courthouse, and then we walked in together, and he was just asking random questions like what I like to do, and like what my favorite sports teams are, and like to gauge if I was incompetent enough. And everybody came into the court room and said and then they were listening to me talk to my attorney, and like after 10 minutes that then my attorney said he's not incompetent, I suggest we look at supported decision making. And then like 2 weeks later, we went to my attorney's office and did, got those documents that Tammy suggested, and so that's why I am so glad to be on the Wisconsin co-lead team, and I believe I have a very inspirational story. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. That's a really powerful story, and it sounds like a lot of stress for you, but ultimately it felt good in the end, huh?
Yes, I really feel good because I will talk about this later on, but it will give me the chances to vote, which I really love to do, and
Right.
go hunting. So without having supported decision making, you wouldn't have the opportunity to do that because they were threatening to take those rights away.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Jenny, that I really appreciate your story, Jordan, and a lot of people in the chat are saying the same thing. So Jenny, now I know that there are some tools that you've used for making decisions too. Do you want to just share with the group who's helping you?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'll share a little bit. I usually ask my mom for help. So whenever I ask her, she helps me, and I think it's okay. But if I ask somebody else, then they might not help me. So it's better if I ask my mom, because she knows almost everything, and she's a very smart woman, and she helps me by, hold on, what does she help me with? She helps me with my finances, my healthcare stuff, sometimes my work-related stuff, and other times she just helps me around the house, and I help her too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you did not go the formal decision-making route. So, guardianship route, but you went right to supported decision-making kinds of strategies, it sounds like, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've never been to court because I didn't have to.
Right.
I didn't either.
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about, like Tammy said, you know, the emotions that lead most people to guardianship, most families to guardianship are, you know, a real love for their, for the person in their family who has a disability, you know, lots of fear about what if this will happen, what if that will happen. And we're going to talk a little bit about strategies for dealing with some of those what if situations, and then a lot of concerns. And I saw in the chat, another issue for a lot of people is that professionals told them that they needed guardianship. And it sounds like, Jordan, with your family, that was a situation where your family got some guidance that they needed to go to guardianship. And so hopefully, you know, as more and more professionals in the state become more familiar with supported decision-making, then we will have a situation where there will not be that automatic going to guardianship first before anything else. So I am having some problems with my slides. I don't know why. I'm pushing the, oh, okay. I don't know if it's a sticky key issue or what. So I apologize for that, but I may need to have Jeremy jump in. Yeah, because of the sticky keys. So, you know, why rethink guardianship? Tammy made the case and gave lots of good information about the fact that oftentimes it just doesn't do what families think it should do, and it doesn't do it in the way that they think it should be done. Again, avoiding that public declaration of incompetency. I think a lot of families, like your family maybe, Jordan, didn't realize that you'd have to go to court and declare, you know, a young person incompetent. So that's an important thing. And that really supported decision-making gives people that dignity and that freedom of choice. And dignity, we're going to get into in a little bit. There's research that shows that when people with disabilities are treated with dignity and respect, you know, their lives look very different. So, and again, we want people to be dealing with the individual, not with the guardian whenever possible, and talking directly to that person. We've heard lots of stories about how expensive and how time consuming it is to go to court. Lots of formal evaluations, maybe hiring attorneys. That we do hear stories of the courts not following the family's wishes and maybe taking it to a full guardianship when the family wanted partial. And then they are very, very difficult to end or change. Whereas some of the other tools we're going to talk about can be changed very quickly. So Jordan, what was your experience, you know, with some of the things about guardianship? You sort of said that in your story, but is there anything you want to add around, you know, how it made you feel, or, you know, what the experience was of actually going into that courtroom?
I guess kind of nerve-wracking because you didn't know what to expect other than having my parents tell me like prepping me the whole way there. But I just really think like you listed off some wonderful examples of why people often think guardianship, but supported decision making. It gives people people with disabilities ways to stick up for themselves, and they really need to do that just like everybody else. 'Cause a person with a disability is just like everybody else, and that's how I look at people with disabilities. Whether they use sign language or whether they can't see, they're just like everybody else. So people should always the guardian should always take that into account when they're looking for people with disabilities, that they can make their own decisions as well as everybody else.
Good point. Jenny, did you have anything else you wanted to say about guardianships?
Yes, I do actually. And I think guardianship is a little more strict versus being alone or independent or having some help from the parents, because guardianship can take away your rights and your freedom, and that's not very good. Mm-hmm. Especially when you are partially or fully independent, because guardianship can, you know, ruin everything, and that wouldn't be a happy ending.
Right. Hey, I just wanted to mention to our audience, Jenny, sometimes do you feel like you need to kind of get up and move around, you know, just to work out your anxiety and everything? Is that why you're moving around a little bit? I just wanted to mention that to the audience.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to mention, you know, all of us deal with presentation anxiety in different ways. And so if you need to get up, you know, I think the audience will understand, although it's great when you can stay seated so we can see you. So thanks.
Yeah, we can understand that too. And if we take guardianship, then they might take advantage of us. And that's not very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah, and you know, the previous slide too said there's no such thing as guardian police. I think a lot of families think if they get a guardianship, that just keeps everybody safe. And the reality is that that's not true. You know, I know people who have disabilities who have broken the law under guardianship and they can still get arrested. There are people who have had a guardian who had a big internet bill, you know, a big expense online, and they were still responsible. So it doesn't 100% guarantee safety. And yet there are some things that we know of in the research, especially more recent research, that does keep people safe. And I just wanted to go over that a little bit because I was just in a meeting yesterday with the Council on Quality Leadership, and we will include these slides for folks in the follow-up. But they have found that when people with disabilities are treated with dignity and respect, and this is based on national research, that people with disabilities are 2.5 times less likely to experience abuse and neglect. That's 2.5 times less likely. Their injuries are reduced by 54% and ER visits go down 57%. So you might ask, what does being treated with dignity and respect look like? And for their research purposes, they defined people being treated with dignity and respect as being allowed to make their own choices on their day-to-day lives, like their routines, their jobs, their friends, where they live and who they live with. So that is actually seen then as a protective factor when people are able to practice making choices and they have choice in their lives. And then the same research from the Council on Quality Leadership showed that people with natural supports in their lives, with friends and family that they can trust, their ER visits go down 60%, and they have 68% fewer injuries than people who don't have natural supports in their lives. So that's a really important thing to think about as we move on in talking about supported decision-making and giving people the maximum number of opportunities to practice in making their own choices. Now, I don't know what's going on. Okay, here we go. So this is a graphic that kind of shows, again, from a national perspective, what happens for people with disabilities. And it's a big orange cross with little hash marks of people. And it shows that the vast majority of people with disabilities have about 8 family members on average in their lives that help them. And they have up to 24 paid professionals in their lives, and then almost 70 other people with disabilities. And that's because oftentimes folks with disabilities are in congregate settings or they go to a day program. But they only have maybe 2 friends and maybe 3 community people in their lives. And yet we're just seeing that with more natural supports, with more people that they can depend on to help them make decisions, people are safer. So it's really, really important for us to be thinking as families, as self-advocates, and as professionals, how can we build more of those natural supports, those connections, those trusted people who can help people make decisions into a person's life? And that's really what we need to focus on quite a bit more than maybe oftentimes happens for folks. So a little bit about how we can start doing that. And that's really empowering people to make decisions, starting with their person-centered plans and with the plans that they have with the professionals in their circles. That's a really safe way to start asking those questions about what people want to do, where they want to spend their time, what kind of jobs they want. So Jordan, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the decisions and routines that you've been able to make in your life?
Well, some of the decisions and routines I've been making in my life is like I mentioned earlier, I got to I like voting, and I get to make my decisions about what I'm having for lunch every day and what I want to wear to work every day. So and my supporters help me get that ready every morning, but I just tell them what I want, and they are generous enough to help me and get that ready for me. So those are my some of my decisions that I make every day.
That's great. And Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the decisions you make every day in your life?
Oh, yes, definitely. My decisions are to wake up early, but not too early, and get ready for work because I need to be there and I want to be on time. But if I'm late, it's not my fault. And that's because my ride comes kind of late or because they get behind. But I like being at work and I like to be there on time, like 20 or 30 minutes early. And my other routines are to eat 3 meals a day, which include breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
So those are some of the decisions you've made. And have you had some help making those decisions or setting up those routines?
Hold on a sec. I mean, When I first started working, yes, my mom helped me with almost everything. Like when I got my first job at an office, she helped me prep my meals and get ready for work because I didn't know what the work world was like, but now I do because I've been working for a while, and my school also, my former high school also wanted me to work after high school instead of go to college right away. And I worked at the hospital for like 10 months, and they've taught me so much at that job.
That's great. And you make a good point, Jenny, that, you know, when you first get done with high school, or maybe even in high school, you know, you're going to need more help with the decisions you make. But as you get older, you become a little more independent. The more you practice, the more you get more experiences. And you find that over time, you don't need as many people helping in some areas. And then you can start trying to work on other areas to make, you know, to make progress and to make growth. So that's a really important point to make.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, when we're in high school, we might need lots of help, but after high school, we start learning things by yourself and you become more independent as we get older.
Right, right. You know, we got a question in the chat about a family that said, even if my loved one is under guardianship, how can I make it look more like supported decision making? Sure. And I think that what you folks are talking about is a really good example where any family, any team that's supporting a young person or a person of any age with a disability can really start looking at rituals, routines, you know, the different parts of their day, and build choice making into every aspect of the day. And it's not as easy as just making all the decisions for the person. It's not as fast as having somebody else make all the decisions, but it's definitely building those lifelong skills, right? The skills that both of you are learning. So I think one of the things that people can start doing is thinking about, you know, like you both have, what are the routines? Who, you know, what do I want to do today? What kind of meals do I want to have? How am I going to get those ready? So a lot of those different kinds of things. Jordan, do you want to talk a little bit about the things that are both like sort of the schedule things, but also some of the things, maybe the things that are frustrating or that kind of get you off your game a little bit?
I mean, okay. With cerebral palsy, you have to rely on a person to basically assist you with getting out of bed, and if my parents are unable, or they got something going on that day that throws off my routine a little bit, like let's say my like van broke down, then my whole routine gets messed up just because I have no way or transport to get to work, or just as an example. And was that what you were looking for, Beth?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's another example from my daughter's life too, where she has to use paratransit. It's not safe for her to take public transit. We've tried, it's just not going to work. And when we first did it, I set everything up for her. But now, you know, over time, when there's a problem, when a ride is late or whatever, she will call herself and try to work through it. And then if she can't get through to them, or they don't understand her, because she also has cerebral palsy and can be hard to understand, then she gets a hold of me, and then I jump in, right? Like I don't do it right away anymore, but I kind of help her along the way. So yeah, that's a great example. Jenny, do you have any activities or things in your routine that motivate you, and then things that, you know, that you've had to have a little help with?
Yes, that's a good question, but I usually go home and watch TV. Sometimes I bake or cook something like in the kitchen. And sometimes I like to play sports whenever it's nice and warm out. And other times I just, other times I just watch TV and movies like on the channels or on YouTube and Netflix. And I talk with my friends like on the internet, and we go shopping, like not every month, but maybe every other month. And we do go out to eat whenever we can.
Mm-hmm. And is that something that you discuss with your mom so that you have a sort of a safety plan where if you're going to go shopping or whatever, she kind of knows where you are or what the plans are?
Yeah, I have to tell her who I'm with and where I'm going. Otherwise, she's going to feel really worried and she'll ask herself where I am. And, that's how moms are sometimes.
Right, right.
Moms are usually overprotective, like my mom.
Oh, I don't know if that's overprotective. That's probably just being a mom, right?
Well, yeah, sometimes that's how moms are because they care about their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this slide just talks a little bit about not just like the routines and the rituals and what motivates people, but also the things that can make people sad or frustrated or upset, because that's also an opportunity to have a discussion and to discuss, okay, what's going to happen next, or how can we work through this? And that's another part of decision making. It's not just making like the fun decisions, but it's also making the decisions when things get rough. And so like Jordan, your transportation barrier example is a good one of trying to work through those decisions instead of just, fixing everything for the person and not having them be part of the conversation, right?
Yes.
So some opportunities for choice making. We just thought we'd share some slides of our presenters here. And then in the middle are a couple pictures about my daughter, Kara. Kara has an apartment that she chose with a roommate of her choice. Her roommate is named Ben, and she really, really get along. And I know for a fact that if, somebody told her that she couldn't have Ben as a roommate, the first thing that we'd start seeing is all kinds of, frustrated behavior, because it's really important for her to be with somebody that she gets along with. And she chose her job too. And I think you guys both pretty much chose the jobs you're in, right? Like you didn't just have something assigned to you, but you got to choose them, right?
Yes. Can I explain some of the pictures that I was in?
Absolutely. Yes, please. Tell us about your life some more, Jordan. Oh, you accidentally unmuted yourself or muted yourself.
I'm sorry about that. I'm looking at the bottom left picture. That's me with my sunflower bridge. My community is very accessible to me, and everybody pretty much knows me in my community because it's helpful when you have a community of supportive people, and when they want you to do something, like my agriculture teacher last year wanted me to I really love the outdoors, and every year there's a sunflower patch by my school that my teacher started doing, and he wanted people with disabilities to experience it like everybody else, kind of like I said in the my story, like everybody else is the same. And well, long story short, he made an accessible path for me to experience the sunflower patch, and for other people with disabilities, because I'm not the only disability person in my community. And the last picture of me on there is I recently started a job at the Marshfield Clinic through Project Search, I found this job in gastroenterology, and now I'm a receptionist at the Marshfield Clinic in gastroenterology in Marshfield, and I really enjoy the experience of getting to know my patients and also getting a paycheck. And also, I really like my advocacy goals because if I never heard about the self-determination conference or supported decision making, I wouldn't have been speaking to you guys today, and I love speaking to anybody that wants to listen to my story.
Those are such great examples, Jordan. Thanks so much again for sharing. And, you know, it just gets right to that point about building natural supports and building community, and that's what's keeping you safe, you know? So it just comes full circle. And the fact that you have this job now, just think how many more people are going to get to know you all the time, right? And kind of have your back. So it's really exciting. Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about the picture of you and kind of a little bit more about you?
Oh, sure. I like to take selfies. I mean, who doesn't, right? But as you know, I don't have any pictures of me working nor doing other stuff because they don't have my permission to take photos. Because they don't have my permission to take.
That's a really other good example of something to be thinking about and talking to people about is permissions to use your name or to use a picture of you or to share your story. And I like that you've spoken up and said what you don't give permission for, Jenny. So that's great. That's another thing that folks can be talking about with people with disabilities is their right, you know, to share their personal information or their photos or not, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's better to ask someone versus not asking them at all and posting their picture with their name and everything on the internet or social media like Facebook or Instagram. Right. I think that's not right, and this person might get very upset. So once again, it's better to ask someone versus doing it behind their back.
Right. And, you know, a lot of families talk about when they say they think they need a guardianship, one of the things they do talk about is internet safety and social media safety. So have both of you kind of done some things to make sure that you're safe when you use social media, or have you had any discussions about safety protocols?
Yeah, I think my mom said try to be very safe and careful and don't talk with strangers unless it's like an acquaintance or somebody that we've seen only once or twice at a meeting or someplace, or somebody from Zoom like Jordan, because I've never seen him in person, right, Jordan?
Yeah, believe it or not, we've never really met in person, but hopefully when COVID goes away, I can meet everybody, because that's the bright side of Zoom is I get to meet all wonderful people on here, but I would much rather be doing this in a setting where I can see all of you, see all everybody's faces.
Yeah,
right.
So that'll be nice, right?
Yeah.
It'll be nice to finally.
Point.
I'm sorry. It'll be nice to meet like Jordan, Jenny, or Phil again. I mean, never again. I've never met them before, but it'll be very nice to meet them.
Yeah. So a lot of people like this graphic that's in our toolkit and in our PowerPoints with the different tools. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how each of us has used those tools, my family, as well as each of you individually. So we'll talk a little bit first about the least intrusive, and yet I think one of the most useful tools, which is the simple release of information form. So Jordan, it sounds like you may have some of those in place. How did you use those?
When I was in school last year, I had to get a release of information for when I had to have my parents come to my IEP meeting, and when I go to the dentist, they ask me, is it okay if I talk to your parents and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. So there's two different ways you can get the school one and then the medical one. The school one, I think you can just ask your special education teacher or special ed director for that. And then for the medical release, I remember we first learned about it when when I took Kara to an eye doctor appointment, and the eye doctor receptionist was like, do you have a release of information? I didn't even know about it at the time. And she got me one right there, and we filled it out, and then it just went into her medical records, and all of her doctors got it through, the medical records, electronic medical records setting. But that's a really handy tool to have, and it doesn't have to just be the parent who's listed on that release of information. So Kara actually is more and more, as she's gotten older, choosing to include her sister. And they're very close, both in age and, emotionally. And so she included them, but I know of families for schools that have had like a trusted family friend or a former educator that the person has designated to help. In fact, a family I know of for the first time just recently had the supporter go to the IEP meeting at the young man's, preference. But what was cool about it is the family was also really great about it because the person was a very trusted person, not just for that student, but for the family, like a family friend. So these are great tools to sort of expand the range of people who can be supporters, but also really simple. And all you have to do is file them with the actual physical organization, whether it's the school district or with the medical complex or whatever, and then it's on file, and then it can be changed at any time, but it doesn't require like a notary or anything like that. So there was a lot of talk in the chat about representative payee, very, very common financial tool used by Social Security Administration, and they do recognize this. So it is not, you do not need to automatically go straight to a guardianship in order to have the representative payee designated. Jordan, I think that's a tool that your family uses. Is that right?
Yes. I am my own representative payee because that's one thing of the that's one of many things that I learned in the 16-week presentation that Wisconsin was a part of, because I was a little late with guardianship, and I was a little late getting signed up for Social Security. So I like a couple months ago, I think it was in September, I called the Social Security office and I got hooked up with them, and I asked them about a rep payee, and they were really helpful and really understanding, and they said I think because I manage my own money, I tell my mom and dad what I want out of the bank and stuff, and they can go get it for me because they the Social Security people said I have a very good understanding of that, and it's a really good accomplishment that I'm my own representative payee.
Yeah, that is, but it was, again, a discussion. It wasn't automatic, right? Like you all had a discussion about
it was like it was like a 20-minute conversation, and I had to verify that I could do that and like do common sense like money things, and then they let me go.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And my daughter Kara doesn't really, she is not a person who really would recognize how to, how much money she's coming in versus how much money is going out. So I'm her rep payee, but we have her Social Security money deposited automatically into her bank account every month. And then all of her bills are also set up as auto deduct, so that it just reduces her, her any kind of interaction that would be hard for her to really handle by herself. So her rent is automatic deduct, her utilities and some of her other expenses. So there are ways to have the rep payee involved, but also to minimize, that financial decision-making if that's going to be hard for a person. So then the other power of attorney is another common tool. It's a little bit more formalized, but it is also something that can be really helpful. Jordan, I think you have power of attorney designated to your family, right?
Yeah, my power of attorney for healthcare and my power of attorney for finances are my parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something interesting. Kara did not have any power of attorneys identified until she was 23. We just didn't, like you, we were kind of late to the ball game about some of these tools. And so we went to an attorney and actually had one drawn up. And it was really great timing because a week later, she had a very serious cardiac situation and ended up in cardiac intensive care and really couldn't make any decisions or even say yes or no about anything. And the first thing they asked is, do you have guardianship or power of attorney? Because there were some very critical medical decisions that had to be made. And I had the power of attorney document in the back of my car. I had never taken it out of the car. So I just took it right into the hospital and gave it to them. So these are really good documents to have on hand, when like a medical situation comes up that really requires somebody to make a decision. I mean, she does go to her own medical appointments. I take her and then she goes in but then they'll call me in and then we discuss, different things after she's had a little bit of time with the doctor. But when it comes to like really complicated decisions, it was great to have that power of attorney in place. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the day-to-day sort of tools and supports that people can use. Again, going back to, it doesn't really matter what legal tools you're using. There's a lot of different pragmatic ways to build decision-making into people's lives and use some tools to get at some of the big areas where families oftentimes have concerns. And I think some of the biggest concerns we hear about and see at the board are, financial abuse and exploitation, the potential for that, safety around the home and safety, with relationships and navigating the community. So those are some of the things where we're going to kind of talk through the things that that different people have. So I know with financial supports, one of the things we hear a lot is, well, he or she doesn't understand money, could be taken advantage of. Somebody's trying to get at their funds because they know they're on Social Security. But there are ways to set things up so that that individual person still has all of their legal rights in place, but their money is not completely, is not just in an account waiting to be taken. So we can talk a little bit about those. Jenny, I think that you have a debit or credit card option that your mom and you have worked on. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I do. I do have a debit card. Actually, it's a credit card because of the chip, and I use it for groceries, like not like big groceries, but like small amounts. And I also use it for clothes, shoes, makeup, and I'm only allowed to spend a certain amount of money instead of spending like over $100 or $200 because that's part of the rules and that's what we planned. So it's best to spend as much it's best to spend or buy what you need instead of buying random stuff and spending like big amounts of money besides on groceries. And it's also best to save your money like in a piggy bank or for a rainy day, because people go out a lot and they spend their monies on whatever. And sometimes it's stuff that they don't really need. So it's best to save your monies and buy what you need so you don't become broke.
So it sounds like this is the financial stuff is something you and your mom have had a lot of discussions about, right? Because I'm hearing a lot of things that you're saying that you clearly had a discussion about, right?
Yeah, me and my mom talked about this before.
Yeah. Yeah, the withdrawal limit is a really handy tool. You can also have a service set up where it's a joint with like both people, like a checking account where both people would have to sign the check in order for the money to be spent. I've heard of families who set up gift cards. You know, there was a story of a young man who loved Taco Bell, and he would go spend, you know, all his money at Taco Bell if he could. And so they would set him up with a gift card of, you know, $10 at a time for Taco Bell. So then, you know, he has a limit. One of the things, and then there's just ABLE accounts are another one where you can set up money to be used on a disability related expense like transportation. My daughter does have an ABLE account, and there's an automatic deduct every month from her paycheck that just goes into it. Or you can set up a special needs trust, and then the trustee would be the person deciding how that money is spent. Kara does have a special needs trust. It doesn't have any money in it right now, but in case she ever, you know, got an inheritance or something, it's there. And again, a special needs trust does not require a guardianship to set up. But I'm also kind of a big fan of just giving people opportunities like Jenny had, where you talk through a plan. And if the person doesn't follow the plan, you know, let's learn from those experiences. I will give you an example. When Kara first moved into her apartment, there was a girls group that met and went like once a month shopping. And she went to a party goods store and spent $220 because she didn't have any limits on her debit card. And, you know, it was a learning experience. What happened was we ended up going through all her purchases. She still had the receipt. We decided which things she really needed or wanted. I think that was like $28 worth of things. And the rest of the stuff we took back. And she got a refund. So it wasn't a fun lesson, but it was memorable for her. And she's never gone on a spending spree like that again. And it was a really great opportunity to have a discussion about it. About, okay, when you go shopping, maybe limit yourself to buying two things that you really want, as opposed to, you know, whatever you can put in your cart. So learning by the taking risks, and then, you know, the dignity of risk, I think, is an important thing here. So next are some home supports, things around the house. I hear from a lot of families, I'm sure maybe Jordan and Jenny, you've heard before from people who say, well, you know, my loved one can't live by themselves, or they need a guardian because they can't make their own meals, or they can't follow a routine, or they don't even get themselves up in the morning. And I know when my daughter first moved out, you know, when she lived with me into her 20s, I was still waking her up in the morning, I have to admit. And when she moved out, she got an alarm on her phone, and magically, without me there, she got up every single morning by herself. I think she has never missed a day of work from oversleeping. So Jenny or Jordan, do you have some home supports or things that you find useful to make you more independent and less reliant on your parents at home?
Yes. Today's a perfect example. Today I'm home alone because my parents both work, and I wanted to do this presentation, so I said, "Why can't you set up the camera?" Because my mom and dad got one inside camera and one outside camera in case I need something. All I need to do is go up by it, detects motion, and it like senses if I'm talking and they get a buzz alert on their phone, like every time I go by it, it buzzes, so it kind of drives them nuts. But like it's a really great tool if I want to have some independence and have the house to myself. I can easily. I have an iPad that I can FaceTime my parents if I need like if I need them to come home right away. But the camera is a great tool.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I will say for safety purposes that my daughter Carrie uses a lot of the same things you just mentioned. She's got a remote support system in her apartment that it's a motion sensor system for like overnights. And she can even call them. So like if she hears a noise or she has a question, and I actually found out they even can provide some support around if you're just feeling anxious. And I told her that, and she's like, oh yeah, I know. I've called them. I've called them in the middle of the night when I'm anxious. And I didn't even know that she had. So those are all really great things. She uses a timer. She does not tell time. So she uses timers to anticipate like when a ride will be there, you know, or while she's waiting for something. We have made friends or know people in the building. When she first moved in, she repeatedly locked herself out because it's an automatic door that locks and she didn't have her key with her. So we came up with a protocol where she could walk over to a neighbor's and knock on their door from the outside, because there were outside doors, patio doors. And then medication assistance, you can get prepackaged dosages of meds mailed right to you. So again, she would not be able to, she'll take her own meds and she knows what time to because of her routine, but she would not be able to like fill a pill box by herself. So, and then Jenny, did you have any examples of technologies or anything you use?
Yeah, speaking of technology, I do have my phone, like always, and I also have my iPad, and sometimes I use my mom's computer for writing emails and stuff. And I also have transportation assistance, so my mom can pick me up like after work or take me somewhere that I need to go. She can take me somewhere, like we can run errands to like the grocery store or have lunch and dinner together. And I think my mom is very helpful when it comes to everything.
Yeah, that's great. So
especially the transportation parts. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Especially the transportation parts, which I don't really talk about because it sounds kind of embarrassing.
That you use a transportation card?
Yeah, I do have a punch card and it's in pink because it's an agency card, and my mom and my social worker kind of talked about it. So they've decided to have me use those punch cards, and there's money in them.
Jordan, you use transportation service as well, or assistance, don't you?
Well, I used to do it since I started this job last week on Monday. The transport I don't blame them, but the transportation service told me that they couldn't get me to work on time, so I had to kind of like you were saying earlier, adapt and think of different options and different ways to think about it. And we ultimately had to get rid of my transportation service that got me to and from Project Search because I'm working longer hours and they're not working the same hours I am. So ultimately, me and my mom carpool to work because she only works like 3 miles. She works for the same company, but she works off campus. So it's like really great time for me and my mom to bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I know that one thing that I think that has been really helpful to expand my daughter Kara's community supports is, opportunities to volunteer and then opportunities to get involved in her own faith community. So we actively, with some outside help from some other people, found a church, it's a church, but a faith home for her that she likes, where they know her and where they're really committed to inclusion. So they actually, and this was before COVID, but they actually have people from the church who give her rides to and from and who pick her up for activities. So, again, expanding the safe people in her life and the people that she can rely on who know her. And it's not just all about me being her support. And the same with volunteering. So yeah, it's, building that community. And then I think from a parent's perspective, one of the pieces of technology I find the most reassuring, although it can also create anxiety for me, is the Find My Phone app. And actually all three of us, my other daughter who lives in California and my daughter here in Madison and myself, have Find My Phone. And so like if she is on a transit ride or supposed to be somewhere, I can actually see where she is with her phone. And I find that to be very helpful. It's also helpful, like, if I want to go skiing or hiking, I'll actually text my older daughter and say, you can map me on Find My Phone, if I'm not back out of the ski trees in an hour, send the guard dogs in to find me. So I just think it's a good backup for anyone, right?
Yes.
So Tammy did a great job of showing you the agreement and all the different topics that people can get a supporter in. Like I said, you do not have to have a single supporter in all of these areas. It's not like a guardianship where you can only have one or two. You can have, several people that help you. I know that Leah Ortiz, who is with the ARC in Michigan, she'll use this kind of game she plays where she's like, think about the person who gives you the best fashion advice. Think about the person who fixes your car. Think about the person you go to for legal advice. Are they all the same person? Well, then why would somebody who needs support in lots of areas of their life choose just one person? It's great if you have more than one person that you can choose for different things. So, and Tammy already mentioned this. This is the different types of areas. It's all spelled out in the agreement. And she also mentioned how you can go to get help and what supporters can do. And so then this graphic kind of talks about what are the qualities that you must have as a supporter. This is all in our toolkit, by the way. So you can work through this, people can work through this as an activity, and then what they do not want to have. So Jordan, do you have some sort of qualities of supporters that you found to be important?
Well, some qualities supporters is they have to understand your values and put your ideas first when you're talking about me. Like I want somebody that values me and that I can trust, and not somebody that puts me down. And like it's like I want somebody that is always there for me that I can depend on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jenny, go ahead.
And that's the reason why my parents were the best option for me.
Mm-hmm. And Jenny, do you have any must-haves or things you don't want to have in a supporter?
That's a good question, but I'm looking for someone who knows me and someone that I know too, and someone who can explain things to me so I can understand instead of, getting confused. And I see my mom like all the time. So my mom is no stranger to that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Beth.
So this is just, again, in the toolkit, but who can be a supporter? And there are different categories here in this sort of honeycomb of colors that we see of hexagon boxes. It does not, oftentimes it really is mainly the family, but it can be community members, co-workers, friends, professionals. It sounds like Jordan's special ed teacher was a very trusted person at one point in their life, in his life. But it can change too. So it can change from year to year or, every few years. So just kind of summarizing the frequently asked questions we get, is there a cost to supported decision-making? Unlike a guardianship that often is costly because of attorneys and other fees, there's no cost for a supported decision-making agreement. You can have multiple supporters. Like Tammy said, the agreement can be changed at any time, and probably a best practice would be to at least review it annually, which means every year, but it can be changed anytime. And then can you use it with other types of tools? Absolutely, you can. So the form, again, is here, and we have a complete web page that we will share with you that has our toolkit to work through with young people and families or any age and families on our website. And then we're very excited that the Department of Public Instruction worked with us to develop their own supported decision-making document. Also will be in your packet, and it features some of the people that you heard from this afternoon, some of our ambassadors, but they did a great job sort of focusing on transition-aged youth. So I think that we are now going to put, I believe, the survey for the training and some info on CEUs in the chat. And then at the same time, bring back Mitch and Tammy for questions. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And before we do that, I just want to say a big thank you to Jordan and Jenny for doing such a great job. They worked so hard in prepping, and I think their stories are so powerful, and really appreciated working with them.
Well, thank you, Beth, and I hope everybody out there learned a little bit about supported decision making, and if you can share what you learned today with 5 other people, that would be great, because the more we can spread the word about supported decision making, that would make a whole difference in people with disabilities and people just in general, because it's not an often topic that gets brought up, and I want it to be brought up.
Love that idea of spreading the word 5 people at a time, Jordan. I'm stealing that one.
Okay, are you ready for some questions?
Sure, you can, whenever you're ready, Phil.
Okay, so yeah, so we have Tammy and Mitch and Beth and Jenny and Jordan ready to answer some questions. I've been collecting them in the chat. There's been some good conversations. Jeremy will put in the chat a link for CEUs. You do have to click on the link here and now and fill out that form in order to get your certificate. And then we also have a feedback form that we would like you to fill out, everybody to fill out, and just let us know what you thought of this presentation and, any thoughts for improving on this training. So appreciate all the feedback that we get. So, okay. So let me just see where we left off on there. Let's see. Is the supporting person, what if the supporting person is abused by the disabled person? How best to change or remove that supporting person?
I can take that one. If the person who initiated the agreement, the person with a disability, is abusing the supporter, both the supporter and the person with a disability have equal right to terminate that agreement. So if you are a supporter and it isn't working for you, for whatever reason, you do not have to continue in that role, and you can terminate that agreement. Obviously, if you are being abused physically, like there is a crime happening, you also have the recourse of reporting that stuff to law enforcement and going down a criminal justice or civil legal path yourself. But like the supporter and the person, it is a mutual agreement relationship. So there's certainly circumstances where a supporter's life might change, where they may say, I cannot do the same level, or I cannot act as your supporter anymore, and that is enough to take them out of that role.
Okay. Thank you, Tammy. Next question is from Leanne, and she asks, can the person who completed the supported decision-making form say in other that they want the person they've named, I'm assuming she's talking about the supporter, to be able to sign legal documents for them? Can they say that?
Nope. They cannot. That is not any delegation of authority that would be recognized. Can't do it.
Yeah, and I think this is on the same vein, but I will share it so that everybody has the information. Is Deb asks, what happens in a supported decision-making situation if the young adult asks you to make decisions for them? I'm assuming they're talking about the supporter again. And like situations, they do not feel confident to make a decision even after the supporter's guidance. Is that in violation of a supportive decision-making agreement if this happens, even if the young person verbally gives the supporter the go-ahead? Is there documentation? Is there a documentation system for each decision the supporter plays a part in? Excuse me.
So this isn't supposed to be hard. Let's not make it harder. This is, again, a learning opportunity. You know, the person is responsible for making their own decisions, and not making a decision is a decision, but it isn't the supporter's decision to make, it's the person's. So, you know, if there are a lot of people with disabilities who get overwhelmed, or who get fearful, or who haven't had a lot of practice making decisions, or maybe have been kind of culturally told that somebody else makes decisions for them. This is an opportunity as a supporter to kind of say, well, no, this is your decision. And you can offer to say, you know, would it help you to talk a little bit more about these options? Or like try and say, hey, you know, it seems like you're really struggling. Like, can we talk about what's maybe causing you most concern? But it's a learning opportunity to have to make your own decision. And that's part of what supported decision making is all about, is it is the person's, you know, they are in charge of making that decision.
Thank you.
Go
ahead, Mitch.
There isn't any requirement that you document every decision that you discuss with the person or the supporter. This is an informal, I mean, it's a document that's supposed to give some structure to what should be a pretty informal way of communicating between the supporter and the person they're supporting. Like Tammy says, it's not supposed to be hard.
Right. Okay. Bonnie asks, my daughter may be attending Shepherd's College in Wisconsin. We live in Illinois, so we're wondering if we can use an agreement to support her while she's here in school in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think so, right?
The daughter, Wisconsin, it has a supported decision-making law. Your daughter's living in Wisconsin, so she would initiate the agreement. And if she chooses her parents as supporters, Wisconsin's law does not require supporters have to be physically living in the state. So if she's living in Wisconsin and we have that law and she's setting up her own agreement, I do not see that there is a reason she couldn't designate somebody living in Illinois as a supporter.
I agree.
Right, as long as she's residing here. Okay. For Tara says, for a child who is planning for transition to adulthood, does the supported decision-making agreement have to be signed after a person turns 18, or can it be signed prior?
It should be signed when the person's 18, not before. It can be signed on their birthday, for sure.
Sure. All right. And Anne asks, is there a legal reason to have a supported decision-making agreement versus inviting someone that a consumer trusts to important meetings, appointments, to provide support and input? Are providers like clinics and schools required to honor the document? Kind of two questions there.
So I'll take the second question first, and Mitch, add on if you wish. Supported decision-making is a legally recognized tool in the state. So yes, the expectation is that that professionals would recognize it just as they would recognize the power of attorney or a letter of guardianship. Mitch, do you have anything to add to that second question?
That's exactly right, Tammy. And I will say this, and that is, if you don't need to have a supported decision-making document in order to do supported decision-making. Way back at the beginning, Tammy explained that what this document does is just give you, legal confirmation and a piece of paper that confirms that you want to use supported decision-making in this person you want to support. But if you don't need it, you don't have to have it. If you want to go into a doctor's office with your best friend and you tell the doctor, hey, I want this person in there with me during the appointment, they should be honoring that anyway. We know as a practical matter that doesn't always happen. And that's one of the reasons we want the supported decision-making document, so that and usually partly it's to make these medical professionals and other people a little bit more comfortable about having a third party in what would be a sensitive conversation with you. They can say, well, yeah, this person was in there, but here's why, and they can point to, if they get audited or something, that there's a document that says, yeah, she was in there because she was a designated supporter under Wisconsin's supported decision-making law. But again, I don't have a supported decision-making agreement with anybody, and I use supported decision-making all the time because there's a lot of stuff I don't know enough about to make a good decision about. So I ask people for their opinions and their input, and oftentimes my decision is in line with the advice that they gave me. And it's fine. That's what we as people do. People with disabilities are no different, but we have this great little tool that confirms it and makes the outer world a little bit more comfortable with that situation when a person with a disability is doing it.
Hey, Mitch, since we have you here, there's a question that I think a lot of people have in the chat, and I think it needs a legal response, which is, if an agency or organization rejects the use of a SDM agreement, who do they call for assistance in having that agency honor it?
Well, it's hard to say. There's no enforcement agency associated with supported decision-making. It's, since the document doesn't transfer decision-making authority to anyone, it's kind of out there in its own little world. So I guess what I would do is if there's most agencies, certainly all medical providers, have a complaint system, a grievance system. And that's what a person should do in that case, is say, hey, what do you mean you're not going to honor my supported decision-making agreement? Get me in touch with with your grievance procedure because that's wrong and I want to complain about it. That's probably the only way you can try to get this enforced.
And like Mitch said, like part of the reason why supported decision making exists is because there's large categories of people where the cultural bias is that we don't believe that those people are equally capable of making their own decisions. So, you know, you have an agreement, it's a way to affirm, I'm the person who you're dealing with, I'm in charge, and this is the role of this person who's here and not anything else. In some ways, you guys are the pioneers who are training folks who have had different habits a long time, that they really should be listening to the person with a disability or the older adult first.
All right, another question, and this is an important one, we get this often. How difficult would it be to have a guardianship in place, then in the coming years, change it to a supported decision-making agreement if the young person is able to gain more life and independent skills?
I will start, and Mitch, you do a chaser. I think in practice, it is always very difficult once a guardianship has been established to change it. Because remember, the court is evaluating at a point in time whether or not you are legally competent to make your own decisions. And if you are not legally competent, you know, at one point in time, the court has to revisit that and say, well, why were we wrong the first time? Why are you competent now when you were incompetent then? And that's a fairly high threshold to go. And a lot of times judges are unwilling to do that, first of all. And I think that the other piece is, you know, every time you go to court, you pay for that. So there is a financial challenge too. Mitch?
Yeah, Tammy's right. Once you're into the guardianship system, it's kind of hard to get out of it. And one of the reasons is because, of course, to get into it in the first place, a medical professional, a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, has to render an opinion that, you know, you lack the capacity to make decisions for yourself. And, you know, there's a kind of an assumption in the court system that the doctors know exactly what they're talking about when they do that. And so they rely on that evidence as one of the main you know, grounds for imposing a guardianship on someone. So if you come back a few years later and say, well, that was, you know, something's changed since then. Well, what the judge is really going to want to see is whether the medical opinion has changed. So what you're almost always going to be faced with having to have another doctor render an opinion that you have regained competency. It's not impossible, but it sure is a lot harder than, you can't just go into the court and say, never mind about a guardianship. They just don't drop them that way. And if you're going to go into court to try to get a guardianship removed, you know, you should, if at all possible, have a doctor in your corner who can support you. And then to the maximum extent possible, try to get everybody else who might oppose it on your side. So that would mean, like, you know, if there's protective services involved, get them to support you. The best person to support you in getting your guardianship removed is probably the guardian themselves. That guardian can go into court and say, look, I'm the guardian, but for the past, you know, 3 years, this person, we've been working closely with them, and they have acquired these decision-making skills, and here's what we've done, and here's how the decisions have gradually been transferred to the person, even though legally I still have to sign it. You know, we've figured out a way to make it possible for the person to be the decision maker that I have to confirm, you know, with my guardianship authority. But all I'm doing is confirming decisions now, and they're making the decisions with the help of these supporters who are going to be in place after I'm gone. And in fact, I might be one of her supporters after I'm no longer guardian. So there's a way to do it, but it's really, it's a lot of work. It could be expensive, and, you know, so our message here is don't get into it in the first place if you don't absolutely need it. You can always get it later if you know, all these other tools that, including supported decision making, but also the protected bank accounts and all the stuff Beth was talking about. You know, try all that stuff first. And if it really doesn't work and the person still isn't being protected from abuse, neglect, or exploitation, then consider guardianship. And even if you start considering guardianship, consider limited guardianships first. Take away as few rights as is absolutely necessary if you have to go into a guardianship.
Good advice, Mitch. Next question. Does the supported decision-making form need to be completed in front of a witness or notarized in any way? Is there a recommended place that it should be kept on file?
So the law does require either the signature of 2 witnesses who have to be 18 or older, or the signature of 1 notary public. And as you would do with any documents, like a power of attorney or a letter of guardianship, we would advise that you leave your supported decision-making agreements and write down where you leave them. So if they get updated, you know where to go and give them new copies. That yes, you should actively keep that agreement with any files that and a business or healthcare or other entity has as part of your record.
Thanks, Tammy. I know we're going to be running short of time, so I'm kind of scrolling down some of the ones that maybe we haven't touched on. Tammy, do you want to talk a little bit about the ABLE accounts and where we're at in Wisconsin? There's several conversations about that.
Yeah, separate issue. You can set up an ABLE account right now as a Wisconsin citizen, but we don't make it easy for you. You essentially have to research yourself and pick a state that you set your account up with. So Wisconsin has been trying to determine whether it should formally enter into a contract with other states or run its own ABLE program. We passed a bill about a month ago to actually do a study to determine which option is better. Be prepared to advocate next budget and legislative cycle because one of those options, either a contract with another state or running our own ABLE program, will cost money, but it will also make it a lot easier for Wisconsinites to figure out and set up their own account. So you can do it, but it's hard now, and we're trying to make it easier. Stay tuned.
All right, and then there was a personal question for Beth. What type of security system does Kara use?
Yeah, she uses Night Owl. So, and it is a sensor system. It puts sensors on the door, but they also can customize to specific situations. So if a person is, you know, the kind of person who elopes or what is it? Where you have dreams, you know,
night owl,
night walk. Oh. Like they're or have seizures, you know, like there's just lots of different things they can do. But so they're very flexible. I will say that, you know, camera systems are fine in private homes, but Medicaid will not allow it. So if you're using a Medicaid, you know, Medicaid program and are expecting, you know, it to pay that, then they do not like the idea of cameras. Somebody mentioned privacy issues, and that's exactly why. But Night Owl meets all the Medicaid requirements, so it can be used as a Medicaid service.
Thank you. And there are some questions about the survey. I'm going to put the link in again for the CEU survey, and I will also put the link again if I can find it back in here.
And Jeremy's also sending it out with the wrap-up email to everybody, so that people can get it multiple ways.
Okay, let's see. Let me see if I can pull out another. Did I ask the question about do healthcare institutions or banks recognize supported decision-making agreements?
Everybody should recognize supported decision-making agreements. They are a legal option, just as far as an attorney and guardianship are. They accept a guardianship, they should accept this too.
And someone asked, can you give an example of a power of attorney legal decision?
Not quite sure what the question is about. I mean, if you're an healthcare power of attorney, they make all decisions for the person related to their healthcare, you know, like medication administration, decisions about, you know, therapies and surgeries and everything. And financial powers of attorney make decisions about finances. So they are the ones who can enter into contracts and, you know, spend people's money and do all that sort of thing.
Well, I think we are at time right now. And like I said, we will be putting these questions and answers together and sending it out with the materials as well. So thank you all for coming and spending your afternoon with us. We hope you enjoyed and learned something from this presentation, and we look forward to seeing you again at future trainings. Anybody else want to say anything before we close? Jordan? You saying bye?